Hi, everybody. This is your co-host, Stu, and I am here with the paranormalist, Patty Wilson. Hi, Patty.
Hi, Stu. How are you tonight?
Good. A little bit caffeinated, as you could probably tell.
Yes, I can. You're all a little bubbly, more bubbly than normal. So tonight I thought we would talk a little bit about the Headless Horseman. Now, everybody knows the Washington Irving story of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. We've all seen it and heard it over the years, and I love the story. It's actually one of my favorite wintertime stories. And if you look at the story, it took place between Halloween and December. So the end of October and the beginning of December. And the fall and the winter were good times for storytelling, and Christmas traditionally in British culture was a great time for storytelling. So they actually told more of their ghost stories at the Christmas season than they did during the Halloween season, because that was a much more solemn time, because it was All Hallows Eve, and then the next day was, the Day of the Hallows People and what have you. So anyway, it's a fascinating story. I have long enjoyed that story. So I began to wonder if that was the only Headless Horseman story and if there was any validity to it. Now, Washington Irving did say he fictionalized the story, but in the area where he lived, there was a story, and this has been documented. In fact, a writer by the name of Christopher Rondina, excuse me, actually went as far as to go to Germany and find the military death records of the Hessian soldiers stationed in that area. And he came across one by the name of Heinrich Range. He was a grenadier, and he died on November 1st. His death is even cited by General Heath in a copy of his journal, which you can still get copies of the original journal. Now, this is what's fascinating. He got wounded in a battle on the 28th of October. He was all but decapitated. He lived, sadly. I mean, that's terrible to live like that. He survived until November the 1st and succumbed to his injuries on that day. Much like the story of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, where his head was taken off by a cannonball, he was that injured by a cannonball and managed to survive for a couple days.
Yeah.
Tragic as it is.
Yeah.
Now, he died in a skirmish in a place called White Plains, New York, which isn't too far from Sleepy Hollow. And he's buried in the Northern Tarrytown Cemetery. And I thought that was fascinating, because this guy fits the bill for everything that the legend was built around. He was a Hessian soldier. He did die in a battle. A cannonball did all but decapitate him, and eventually he succumbed to his injuries. And there are stories that it was believed that he rose from the dead, and would be seen riding along. So, did he get the story from there? Well, it's quite possible. It's also known that Washington Irving spent some time in Scotland, and he heard some Headless Horseman stories in Scotland. So maybe he amalgamated them. But there seems to be at least a grain of truth in this story. So the next question that popped into my head was, are there other Headless Horsemen floating around out there? And I found that there were several. I have to tell you, I'm not giving you a definitive history, because that would take days. There's a lot of them around the world. But I am going to tell you a few of them. So there's one called the El Morata, which means the dead one. And this story is really interesting. This one takes place in Texas. It starts out with a guy named Creed Taylor, who at the age of 15 ends up going to Texas. He becomes a battle-hardened man. He fought Amanda Cannon in Gonzales, Texas, against the Mexican army. He fought in many other battles, and then after the Battle of the Alamo, he escaped and took his family and joined Sam Houston's forces. He fought San Joaquin and defeated Santa Anna. He was, just that kind of rough and ready guy. At some point, he would become one of the Texas Rangers. Meanwhile, there's another fellow by the name of Wallace. Now, Wallace, he was a criminal at heart, I suspect. He came to Texas to avenge the death of his brother and his cousin in a battle. And he ended up in a Mexican prison for a while. He kind of bummed around, stealing and robbing and what have you, and became a horse thief. And that's important because that's how he and Creed Taylor meet. So Taylor has a ranch, and he's got a lot of wild Mustangs that he's planning on letting raise up, and then he's going to sell them. And he's keeping a close eye on them, and Wallace is too, because Wallace is planning to do the same thing. He's horse wrestling. Now, he was wrestling from not just Creed Taylor, but he was also planning to steal horses from Taylor's next door neighbor, a fellow by the name of Flores. And after he stole some of their prized Mustangs, they got on his trail pretty quick. They caught him and his men, and they decided they were going to make an example out of this fella. So they literally hacked his head off. They tied his body to his horse. They tied his head dangling off his arm down along the side of his horse, and then slapped the horse on the rump and sent it off into the desert. And for weeks and months thereafter, people talked about seeing this headless horseman with his head bouncing along beside him. Eventually, a group of men caught the horse, took the body that had been tied to it off. Of course, it's now reduced to pretty much skeleton. And they gave the fellow a burial. But that didn't stop the stories. From then to now, and God only knows how much further out it'll go, people in southern Texas tell the story of the dead one who is still seen riding across the desert as though he were tied there for eternity by Creed and Flores.
Not something I want to come across. But although
No.
I love ghosts. Yeah, I mean, meeting ghosts, talking to ghosts, but something like that, I think I would. Yeah, I'd refrain.
Yeah. There's another story, very much along the same lines. The American Army actually, for a while, contemplated using camels in the American Southwest because it's such a desert area, and they're so much more better suited for the terrain and for the dry, arid conditions. So they brought in a few hundred camels, and there's a story. He's not a headless horseman, but he's definitely still a corpse riding a camel, where a young soldier got trapped in his rigging and couldn't get off this camel, and the camel went wild, and it ended up killing him, and he sat in the saddle for months until somebody was able to knock the body off after it became bones. And of course, all the wrappings from the leather reins and stuff got looser because there was no legs muscles and stuff, and they managed to knock the body off. So there's a couple such stories in the Southwest, but I thought this one of the dead one was a pretty interesting story to tell.
And you're correct.
And I want people to know that not all these stories are from the 17 and 1800s. I mean, our first one was Revolutionary period. The second one was pretty much Civil War era time. Now the next one came from the 1980s.
Oh, okay.
And it's a little bit different perspective. So this is a gentleman who is Hispanic in origin, whose mother was Mexican, and she came to the United States and became a citizen. And this is her story. So according to the story, the way he tells it, when his mom was a teenager in her little town in Mexico where she grew up, there was this great big party, and all the teenagers were invited. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, everything shut down, and the kids were all walking home. And along the way, this young man's mother broke the heel of her good shoe. And any girl could tell you, it's really hard to walk in one high heel and one low heel. You just get that lopsided, and your feet hurt and what have you. So when she came to a place where there was a bench, she sat down. Well, the other teens that were with her in her party decided to sit down with her and kind of wait and talk and josh while she was resting and what have you. And just as they got up to start walking again, she noticed something in the distance, and she pointed it out. It looked like a group of riders on horses riding hard through the night. And they all saw it, but they didn't think anything of it. And as they got closer and closer to the teenagers, they thought it was a group of Native Americans, and that was even as puzzling because as far as they knew, there were no Native Americans living in the area. So why would a group of them be beating the horses and riding them hard through the night? Well, the teens kept walking, and they could hear the riders coming up. They could hear the yips and the calls and the thundering of the hooves, and it was unnerving, if you can, as I can imagine. It's like probably 4 o'clock in the morning now, and you look back in the dark and you see the horses, coming towards you, and the big cloud of dust and all of this. So they got to this little bridge, and by now the horsemen were almost upon them. So the kids split up and sort of pulled off to the sides and let the horsemen go across the little bridge. And that's when they all saw it. One of the riders had no head. He had a hat that was sitting up high where his head should have been. He had a medallion dangling around his neck and leather gloves. And he was riding that horse for all it was worth. And he and the rest of the riders rode across the bridge, and the headless man pulled up at the far end of the bridge, made his horse rear up, and then all of them just disappeared.
Interesting.
So even though there was no known legend, all of these, 16, 17-year-old kids saw it. And
And nothing, nothing threatening, just frightening, right?
Just frightening, unnerving, I would think, to see that. And she asked around, and to the best of everybody's knowledge, there's no such legend. But obviously something was happening, and something triggered them to come riding out of the desert that night and head in that direction. Maybe they weren't even aware the kids were there. But on the other hand, he seemed to want to show off before they disappeared. So he turned his horse and reared it up. So maybe he noticed them.
Yeah, that is so very interesting. I mean, you just imagine seeing the, no head, but the hat.
That's the thing almost, I thought was odd.
Almost cartoonish.
It is. But I will tell you, the thing that I kind of thought about was that I've seen photographs of a spirit as it's manifesting, and it doesn't manifest all of itself at the same time. Sometimes it'll be really solid at the top or really solid at the bottom, but very shadowy or indistinct on the other half. So maybe the head was just indistinct in the darkness. She couldn't see it. Or even it was gone. He hadn't manifested his head.
Yeah, who's to say? But
yeah, because there's no way to tell with that particular legend. So, and I found a few more stories that I'd like to share. There's a ton of them, but these were ones I found really interesting. So, in Missouri, in the Cape Girardeau area, it was a French settlement. They along the Mississippi River, and they had trading posts, and from the trading posts grew the town. And there's a road in the town called Bloomfield Road in the area. And the story goes that in the 1780s, French settlers started settling there, and there was a battle during the Native American conflicts. And in this battle, there was a man who lost his head. Again, a cannonball took it off. And he's seen either walking or riding, depending on who tells you the story, along that road. He seems to be still looking for his head or wandering aimlessly. And it's an interesting road because not only does it have this legend attached to it, it also has many other ghost stories. There's a story of a girl named Mad Lucy, and we'll maybe talk about that another time. But it seems that this particular stretch of road, some places just seem more haunted than others. And this is one of those places. There's at least 4 or 5 legends and ghost stories in that area. But the oldest one that I could find was the Headless Horseman riding along without a head.
Yeah, well, I mean, what makes certain areas, more prone to that, with quartz deposits, who knows? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there's no way of saying. It's an interesting story because it goes back so far, and it's still an active story today. I mean, think about it, from 1780 to now, It hasn't died out. It hasn't seemed to morph a lot. It's just every so often there's people who come along who say, hey, you're not going to believe what I just saw on that road.
Yeah, I'm sure there's somebody that believes them.
Oh, I'm sure those who have seen it in the past probably believe.
Yeah.
So our next Headless Horseman story comes from Tennessee, from Murfreesboro. Now, Murfreesboro, during the American Civil War, sadly had the distinction of being the area of one of the most, actually probably the most bloody battle of the Civil War, in the area called Stones River. Now, it is from that conflict that the story arises. So the Confederates were led by a gentleman by the name of General Bragg, and there was a Union general by the name of General Rosecrans. And Rosecrans had a lieutenant whose name was Garsh, and he was a devout Catholic man. He was a nice man, a really nice, decent young man. And during his time at West Point, he and Rosecrans became the best of friends. During his time prior to the Civil War and right during it, he got stationed in Texas. And he and his brother, who was also in the military at the time, decided to part ways because his brother was going to fight for the Confederates, and Garsh was going to fight for the Union. He was a Union officer, and he planned to stay that. This disagreement got so bad that he told his brother that if he left and fought for the Confederates, he would never speak to him again. He said, I want you to know that for your act of treason, I hope you go straight to hell. It was a bitter way to end their brotherhood. And after that, his brother never spoke to him again. I don't honestly know what happened to his brother. Maybe he didn't make it through the war. It's definitely a fact that Garsh did not make it through the war. Guilt overtook this young man as the months went on, and he thought about what he had said and the possibility that he and his brother may never meet again. And these were the last words he ever said to the person, he grew up with and he loved so much. Eventually, he felt so guilty that he went and he sought out a priest in the area named Father Frederick, and he talked about he wanted to heal the rift between him and his brother, and that he felt compelled to do so quickly because he believed he was going to die soon. And the priest listened to him, and he said he felt terribly sorry for the boy, but he thought the boy had had a premonition that he was going to die, and that it would probably be in the next battle he fought in. So Garsh went into that battle feeling fated to die. He didn't die in that battle, but on September the 14th of 1861, very early in the war, he would go into a battle where he would become beheaded. And it is his apparition that is seen. Those who were there and witnessed the battle and witnessed him dying said that a Union gunner in error pointed his gun in the direction of his commanding officers, and Garsh was the one who ended up taking the bullets. He literally killed him and cut it in. The severity of it took his head off. Garsh's body rode forward for about 20 yards, still on his horse, holding onto it before he fell to the ground. He's buried in Mount Olive Cemetery in Washington, D.C., but his headless body has still been seen for many years, galloping along in that battlefield. The area where that battle took place is now a railroad track, and there are employees who tend the track who have seen him over the years. They usually see him late in the evenings, riding along the railroad track area, which would have been up through the valley where the battle took place. And there was an interesting story that was kind of a sidelight. So there was Civil War reenactors were popular. Not as popular today as they used to be prior to COVID. You don't see as much Civil War reenacting. But they were very popular in the 1980s and 1990s. And there was a reenactor who brought his wife Peggy with him, and she was walking along the battlefield area, and there's memorials all over that area, to different soldiers and different groups of soldiers, and well, very much like Gettysburg. in that respect. And she was reading them when she heard a horse galloping up behind her. She turned to look, wondering who was, riding a horse up that close to the monuments and the tourists. And she saw a headless rider racing along the tracks behind her. And as she watched him in shock and horror, he just faded away. And it was only after that that she learned the story of Garsh and how he came to be the Headless Horseman.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here nodding because I
mean, it's fascinating. And now I wanted to talk about one in England that was really interesting to me because it's part of another bigger haunting. So anybody who's into the paranormal has heard of Borley Rectory, considered one of the most haunted houses in the England. And there's multitudes of ghost stories, from the nuns walking to the priest walk to the house itself being haunted by something so hideous that caused a dog to jump out of an open window and die, and all kinds of stories. One story that never gets much attention, but which is repeated, and people have still been seeing it to this day. Every so often there is a coach and 4 horses that come barreling through the night up to the house, and they are driven by 2 headless horsemen. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows what story is behind it, but it is well documented from the late 1800s all the way up through to modern times.
Yeah, for as much caffeine as I've had, my mind's blank.
Well, I don't know how long this episode was going to be, but I just wanted to share these stories. There's one more. So okay. In Scotland, there is a story which is probably one I thought really an interesting one, and it goes back so much further than all the rest. So there was, of course, in Scotland, families were known as clans, and it was the Clan MacLean. And they have a haunting story that is literally hundreds of years old. This story dates back to 1538. There was a fellow by the name, I know this sounds crazy, Ewan of the Little Head, who fought against the MacLean family in a dispute. And in the battle between the 2 sides, Ewan gets beheaded. Ever since that time, this fella, Ewan, has haunted this family. He is seen riding up to the house or the family member with his sword drawn and his headless body gripping the reins of the horse. And when he is seen, it means that imminently there will be a death, and the person who saw him will be the one who will die within hours. Throughout the years, there are many people who have witnessed the ghastly rider. Other people have seen him, but the person who is slated or fated to die seems to be he knows it's him. That's the person that this was meant for. And it says that the horse has hooves that thunder. And the interesting thing about this story is that when the horse disappears riding off, you can see these pressed down heavy hoof prints in the turf to let you know he is ridden by.
And that's fascinating. And just listening to these stories, it just dawned on me that, all right, so any other ghost story, it's just the ghost.
Right.
Okay. And in most of the stories, either the horse or the camel or whatever,
right,
didn't die at the same time as the person, but yet they're still on the horse or on the or
right,
on whatever ruminant animal that they're riding upon.
Right. No, and you're right. And I think that I don't think that necessarily that animal is a ghost. I think it's just the imprint of what was there. Now, this last one is really kind of fascinating, because the rest of the story is that whenever this all happened, the day of the battle, Ewan's body was tied upright in the saddle and sent back to his family. And it is believed that, I know, what a horrible thing to do. But when the family saw him coming, even with his head missing, they recognized the horse, they recognized his clothing, and they knew what had happened. And so I think it's more of an imprint of the anger and the pain and the shock for that person who died so suddenly and so, in some instances, so cruelly. I mean, obviously wars are horrible things, and most of these stories start out with a war scene. Not all of them, but definitely most of them. And so I don't know that the horse is actually a ghost. I think it's just that the strength of this haunting, it needs it. Sort of like clothes. I mean, there's this old saw in the paranormal community. Okay, I can understand a person haunting, but how come he's fully dressed? Clothes are an inanimate object, but they choose to show themselves in some way. And if you look at the history of ghost stories, somebody dies. Like, for example, Grandpa dies and he's 87 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Grandma says, wakes up in the middle of the night screaming, oh my gosh, my husband's here. And her daughter comes running in, and there sits her father in a chair, and he smiles at him, and he looks like he's 34 years old. And she's seen pictures of him at that age. Others appear just as they do the moment of death in the clothes they were wearing the moment of death. Sometimes it's in clothes that they particularly liked, maybe not the ones they were wearing when they died, but clothes that they particularly were fond of. Pretty frilly pink dress, or he always wore his cowboy boots the night he died in his bed, so he didn't have them on, but when you see him walking around the house, he's got the jingle of his cowboy boots.
Or a bicyclist getting hit and you see him on his bicycle. Yeah.
Yes.
You've told that story. Yeah.
Yes, and that was a sort of startling one, because this guy looks so real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess that's an interesting topic all by itself, like associated objects and clothing and things whenever people die. Why do you see those?
Yeah, you think about it, clothing is just inanimate. Mm-hmm. I only know one story where a ghost appeared naked. I have a story in Totally Bizarre, Pennsylvania. Everything in this book had to be bizarre. So I found a story about a ghost that was, him and his neighbor were fighting a property dispute. And anybody who's ever had a property dispute or known anybody who had a property dispute knows they can get to be very heated. And the fella died, and this whole thing had not been resolved. And apparently there was a fence. And the guy would walk along the fence when he was living, and he would yell and scream, "Your fence is on my farm! Get it off my yard, blah, blah, blah." And he would scream and carry on. Well, after he died, people would see him stalking along that fence, buck naked. Oh. Only story I know like that.
That's odd.
Other than that, every ghost story you ever hear, the person is dressed. So I find that whole thing fascinating. So I believe that they will it into being. We don't know what our minds are capable of until we give it a shot. And I think they will it into being. This is their last impression. So this is exactly what they want us to see, or this is the way they want to be perceived by the world. So maybe Grandpa shows up 34 years old instead of 89 or whatever it was. You see that all the time. Cassie?
No, that's the new one. She sneezes a lot. I would bring her over, but literally I don't want to get the cat snot all over me.
I get it. Anyhow, that's the end of my ghost stories for tonight.
Oh, okay. So thank you, Patty, for all the stories tonight. And we want to let people know that we have a Facebook page, the Paranormalist Podcast. And if you're seeing this on Facebook or you're seeing it on YouTube, the links for everything is down below. If it's on YouTube, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you get notified when we do have new content. Email address, paranormalist@theparanormalistpodcast.com. And with that, I think that's all I have.
And I just want to wish everybody a good evening.
Right. Thank Patty. You too. Good night.
Night.